This is the Gentleman Podcast brought to you by Shane and Josh. Now, before we begin, have another glass of water.
Going to be a couple of interviews today, Ben. We want to make sure that we both find the right fit. Business as usual is not really our motto, so we hope you have some fun here. This is the first time we're hiring senior interns, so some of our intern questions may not exactly fit your profile, but we're going to go for it anyway, okay?
Fire away.
Okay, good. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Northwestern.
Hey, my brother went to Northwestern.
Probably not at the same time.
Probably not. He graduated in 2009.
Class of 65.
Wow. What was your major? Do you remember?
And after Northwestern, you went on to...
I went to work for Dex One.
Okay, and they made...
Phone books. I was in charge of overseeing the printing of the physical phone book. I did that for over 20 years. And before that, I was a VP of Sales and Advertising.
So, do they still make phone books? I mean, doesn't everyone just Google numbers?
I believe they do, but before Google, that was how you got it.
Oh, no, yeah, I get it.
So 40 years at the phone book company, that is amazing. Seriously. Okay, Benjamin. Now, I'm going to ask you one of our more telling questions for all of our interns, so I want you to, this is the one to really think about, okay? And take your time. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
When I'm 80.
Yeah.
Well, that was obviously Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. Now that's Robert De Niro in the movie The Intern, which, as you can tell, is probably a very awkward interview scene, and I'm sure we've all been there. And so today's episode is going to be a bit about interviewing and that process. And Shane and I, ironically, we once we came to this topic, we talked a little bit and we kind of distilled it down to several points, and we actually had a lot of overlap. We used a little different verbiage on how we described them, but once we talked it out, we really kind of do very, very similar things.
Yeah, and look, there's no silver bullet. I'm not saying everything we discussed today are going to be the go-to things for you, but these are we came up with 5. These are the 5 points that most resonated with us in ways to put yourself in a good position for an interview. Number one thing was confidence. We're going to talk a lot about that. Being confident going into that interview, being confident when you leave it. Honesty, there's no shame in admitting throughout that interview process if there's something that you don't know but you're willing to learn. There's a way to frame that. Preparedness. Look, you have to do your homework, whether you're applying for a job within a company that you already work or it's a new job. You want to go in prepared. You want to know what points best sell you and what that company is really looking for. Genuine responses. This is a big one for me. People can tell when you're disingenuous. People can tell when you're just kind of going through the motions here and you're saying the cliche things. Be genuine. That's a really good way to get yourself remembered. And then I think the last one, which is probably the most interesting, is listening to what your interviewer is really actually asking. There's an active and powerful listening tool that we use. We'll probably reference later in the show. But those 5 points for me are really the take-home kind of things. And this is not to say that you will always get the job if you utilize and have success in all 5 of these points. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes things are just out of your control.
Yeah, I know. I think that's absolutely right. The point is that my perception is that these are things that have worked for us a little bit, and you may lose, as Shane pointed out. You may not get the job, but at least if you feel like you gave it your all and that you walked out of an interview, feeling successful, it's still very disappointing if you don't get it, but you won. What you don't want to do is walk out and just really feel like you blew your shot, because there, as Shane mentioned, there may be something out of your control. For all you never know who you're going up against, and there could be an applicant that just has more experience. So you can kind of only do your part. You can only control the stuff you can.
Yeah, and speaking of out of control, I want to acknowledge it is not lost on us the times that we are living in here in pandemic living. we understand what the job market is right now. It is hard out there. There is no perfect script. There is no silver bullet that we mentioned in ways to get yourself in the door for a job. And we understand how stressful that can be. So an episode like this is something that's exciting for us to sit and talk about given the times. This is one of those episodes where we feel like, man, if we can really offer some things that have worked for Josh and myself, and it helps one of our listeners out, that's a real win for us. And that is truly why, us gentlemen are sitting here doing a show like this today.
And thank you, by the way. You mentioned the listeners, and I want to say thank you. How we came to this topic is from some feedback, and I just want to reiterate to anyone that may be listening, we are open to suggestions, we are open to thoughts, and it helps us because what we want to try to do is give you what you're looking for. And if there's something we haven't touched on that you feel like you could use some direction or just want to pick someone else's brain, that's great. So please don't hesitate to reach out. How we came to this one was that we obviously talked about some professional stuff in other episodes, and someone reached out to Shane and asked him, what does he do before an interview to try to get himself into the right headspace?
I am curious, do you have anything that like you do the night before or the day of an interview that kind of puts you in the right headspace?
I don't know if I would say I do this all the time, but I will say this is a technique that I have utilized, and I very much advocate, if this resonates with people, that they do it. You kind of just tap danced around some of this thing. I'm all about the mock interview, connecting with a friend or your partner if you're dating someone that they can actually run through questions with you and run through scenarios, and because they may ask questions that might wind up being harder than the actual interview. But the point is, if you can get through that, you will be more comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also a huge fan of the mock interview. It is, I've found in my experience with those, you mentioned people ask harder questions. I find that they ask more interesting ones. Another thing for me, and just a quick point, I mentioned one thing I did want to touch back to is, for me, working with, really honestly, working with all 5 points that we talked about, I have like these routines or these things that I'll do to kind of put myself in a good headspace the morning of or the day of an interview. And these things may not work for everyone, but the things that for me and people like me, they're great tools. And I would strongly suggest, giving any one of them a shot. I love to start my day with like an actual active purpose. So for me, like making a good breakfast that day, it can be simple, but it's just something like that I cooked, I prepared. That sets like a really good tone. Like I got up and I accomplished something super quickly and easily. And that's something to feel good about for somebody like me. And then another thing that I try to do is yoga. It's something, and again, I know it's not for everybody, but to just really ground myself for that moment and just kind of de-stress and calm down. It really helps the anxiousness going into any type of an interview. And then that final thing is, and this is something that I try to do as often as possible, regardless, to just kind of cleanse myself from social media. The amount of distraction that could come from that the day of, like that, you may see something you just really wish you didn't have to see going into an interview. And I just think it's a good thing to just kind of sit there and just be really in touch with what it is you're feeling, the excitement you're feeling, because I feel like that's something that really is going to be apparent to the interviewer, if you're fully engaged in that, or if your mind is kind of elsewhere. So those are just some like quick tricks that I do the days of interviews to get myself right and get myself going.
I like that. I think everything you said is absolutely right. It's really funny you said that, because now I'm trying to replay in my head, and I'm like, do I have breakfast? If I have an interview in the morning, do I have breakfast? Or do I skip breakfast and just go with the
eggs over medium? That's just an easy but good breakfast.
No, it is. I'm just trying to think, like, does that work for me, or do I work better with a little bit of the empty stomach, so I'm not in the middle of the interview and then I'm like, can you excuse me? I need to, So I don't really know. Yeah, like I'm thinking on that, like, wait, do I or don't I? I don't know. And then I think that yoga thing is really great. I do. I think that it's a nice way to just unwind. Maybe for someone else, it's going to do a little
Meditation.
bit. Well, no, I was going to say a little bit the other direction. Maybe they go to the gym and do a little more strenuous workout. If that's their physical outlet, that lets them kind of just get into a Zen place. But I like both of those. That idea of like I have to do something to kind of just disconnect a little bit. I usually, like, before an interview, I'd probably make and post some content to my OnlyFans just to just to get it out of the way.
Oh, there you go.
That way I know I'm done for the day. I don't got to do it again.
That's it. That's just called pre-planning right there. That's getting yourself ready.
I think another good one, in the moment, if you are walking in, I think a good pointer would be when the opportunity opens, if the opportunity opens in the course of the interview, that you can have dialogue with the person asking you questions and ask them, what's your experience been in the company for the last few years? Like, how long have you been here? That kind of thing. And the reason I say something like that, it may not bear, if that opportunity arises and you feel comfortable to do it and that person will engage with you, I think it might make you more comfortable. Certainly it makes me more comfortable because it's kind of a reminder. The pointer that I guess I would say here is that person has literally been exactly where you're sitting. And even when you have a lot riding on an interview, because God knows, especially right now, if you need a job, I mean, there's a lot of emotional weight on that. I get that. But it can help to kind of disconnect just for a little bit and remember that they're a human being too. They have probably sat, possibly even filling the job that you're applying for. Maybe at one point they had that job and were promoted. So I think that's a nice thing to try to ground your experience.
Yeah, look, it's bridging a connection, and ultimately that helps an interviewer or whoever's sitting across from you on that table that day remember you, because again, it's you're engaging with them in a way, and you're humanizing this thing, and I think that's a really, really good point and a good tool.
Also, I wanted to ask Shane, is there anything you do post-interview?
So I am horrible about replaying things, and I actually have to tell myself to not do that, so whether it be on the drive home and I'll start saying, man, what did I say to that question? So what I actually end up doing is I do one of two things, and this will probably be different than what it would be for almost any listener, but I will Google the nearest baseball field or the nearest lake. Those are two places that for me, when I just really need to just feel like my most comfortable self, it's those two things. It's growing up fishing with my dad, and then it's growing up taking ground balls in the baseball field. Those are the two places I've always felt most comfortable and calm. To me, I'm probably coming down from a bit of nerves or excitement in that conversation, and I just want to feel good. And those are the two places that immediately bring it out for me. How about you?
I don't know if I have a go-to.
OnlyFans content?
OnlyFans content, there you go. I don't know if I have a go-to, but yeah, I would say part of it is probably talking it out with someone else. Like if I had an interview, maybe I call you or I call someone else and just be like, how was the interview? And then you kind of talk it out a little bit. And I think that kind of helps me. But I don't disagree with you. I think that if there's an activity I can go do, that's great, because I definitely do I will save the listeners my poor attempts at French, so I will not try it to say it in French. But there's a French term, it's called the spirit of the staircase. And it's the idea that, when you're at a party and someone says something, you always think of the best comeback once you're on the stairs and you've already left the room.
Yes.
And so I definitely get that. So I like your idea, maybe go for a jog for myself or go to the gym. I wouldn't say I have a set. It's the OnlyFans. I know it's the OnlyFans. When they find it, it's going to be amazing.
It is going to be amazing. All right. So OnlyFans content aside, let's get to those 5 points that we were kind of discussing about earlier.
So confidence in interview for me, you always have to ride that line. And the catch is, what you know, but you don't want to come off as cocky. The fastest way to kill an interview
arrogance.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember I was sitting in a really brief interview once, and the person who was asking the questions asked the interviewer something, interviewee something to the effect of like, what do you think you bring? And this young guy was just like, oh, I could raise the profit margins here 10% a year. And the minute he said that, I just felt terrible for him because I was like, that is the absolute opposite thing you want to say right now. Because the person giving the interview, she was dead to rights. She said, okay, tell me how you do that. And everything this guy said was just so cookie cutter. There was, oh, well, I'm going to review, your sales. I'm going to review places to cut, this, that, the other thing. That doesn't really sell me. What it makes me feel is like, well, anyone who's applying for this job is probably going to say the same kind of thing. You're not being, really honest. And now your confidence has probably bit you in the ass and come off as cockiness. Would have been a lot stronger if that interviewee had said something like, in my last job, I demonstrably did these things, and that raised, our overall year-over-year profit margin by, if it really was 10%, let's say 10%. But you know what I mean? But presenting it as like I know I can do this just immediately set the wrong tone.
First of all, it's a really good way to answer questions in general, is if you can immediately pull from your previous experience that you are comfortable and confident in talking about. That's you controlling that conversation and having them ask the questions that you'd like them to ask that do make you seem a little bit different than the 500 other interviews that may be set up for that same position. I think that's always the right way to answer a question in an interview. I don't know if you feel the same way, as opposed to, just like you said, Josh, sitting there and saying, I can do X, Y, or Z without frankly having done it in that next role or next position.
Absolutely. And that segues, I think a little bit to my next point, which is you have to be genuine in your responses. I've always tried to be genuine and honest. And that may mean, and this is going to tie directly to the confidence point though, that might mean for me that like, if someone asks me, do you know how to do X, Y, or Z? I would probably be honest and not necessarily, if I haven't done specifically what they're asking for, I'm all about saying, yes, I can learn this, or yes, you want to give me the opportunity thing. But if I haven't done specifically what they're asking for, I might mentally try to say, okay, how does that connect to something I have done?
Yes.
And be able to tie that. And because what you don't want to do, or at least what I have tried not to do, is come across as the person who's just going to say yes to everything. Oh, I can do this, or I can do that, or yeah, absolutely. Like I said, there is a time and a place for that. Certainly once you have a job, in my experience, as I've mentioned before, just saying yes to the opportunity and sure, yeah, and then you kind of go figure it out or learn it. But when you're sitting there, you really, for me, I'm selling myself. And what I don't want to do is sell myself incorrectly, where then someone later can come back and say, oh, well, you said you could do X, Y, and Z, and you really can't. And now it looks like everyone's wasted their time.
Using an example from my own life, I have had, and I can count on one hand, I've been very, very fortunate. And a lot of the reason I've been fortunate is because I've kind of surrounded myself with people who challenge me before I ever even get into this interview room, so to speak. So people like Josh, people like my buddy Al or my buddy Jack. There are different people who have kind of been there, done that. I walked into this interview and I felt like I was the best candidate walking in the room. And my interviewer immediately sensed this and began to ask me the difficult questions. And at first I said yes. Yes, I can do this. Yes, I can do that. Catching me in that and then having to answer the follow-ups to those things really, really put me in an awkward position, because then I had to make the decision, and I did in the middle of that interview, knowing that at this point I now have to learn from this experience. This isn't going the way I had hoped.
Yeah, I mean, not only that hits onto another point that has worked really well for me, which is preparedness. And this is a two-way thing, because I think, especially when I've applied for a job, that it's one thing to apply for a job when you're in the company already and maybe a new position opens up in that company. You have to be prepared because it's a different role. You might be working under someone different. So you really have to, I've always felt like I really have to go through a whole new checklist. Like, okay, what does that position entail? Is there anyone that I know that's had that position in this company? Can I speak with them? All that kind of thing. But when you're applying for a job that's outside of your company, you have to do even more homework, because you are walking into a completely different corporate culture. And I got a funny story on that. Shane's shaking his head, so I want to let Shane respond to that. But I have an amusing anecdote about that one.
No, I'm just shaking my head because I too have stories about the very same thing. But go ahead, Josh, please.
When I was working in California at one of my jobs, I shared an office with the VP, and his name was Stefan. And we're talking about doing homework again, guys. So one day we were looking for new effects artists who, these are computer guys who usually have a very artistic kind of bend or vision. So, fill in what you perceive that kind of person to be. And we were looking for new guys, and Stefan's like, hey, do me a favor. And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm just going to be bringing in people today, one-on-one, interview them, see what they're all about, see what my feeling is. But I'm going to look over their resumes. And he's just like, so I'm going to use a code. And if you hear me say, oh, I'm looking over this, I'm just curious, have you ever worked for like Asylum Pictures or anything like that? That's your code to call me or pick up the phone and say that I am needed on a phone call, because we got to get that person out of the room. And I said, like, okay, thinking he's kind of joking, right? Like, okay, fair enough, guy has a sense of humor. And so he brings in a couple people. It was like the second or third body of the day. This guy walks in, had to be young 20s. He's wearing a white wife beater t-shirt, a sports coat, and I think shorts was my memory. Like, he came in, shook hands, sat down, and Stefan literally was like looking over his resume. He's like, okay, yeah, so you got some experience here. Have you ever worked for Asylum Pictures? Interview was over that quick. Was that quick over. And it was extremely judgmental on his behalf. I acknowledge that. You know what I mean? Like, you really are judging the book by the cover. But it just, to him, and I mean, again, I got the guy out there real quick. I was, give it a couple more minutes. The guy started talking, and, I was like, oh, hey, Stefan, there's a phone call you got to take. It's important. We got a meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, Elena, we'll reach out, blah, blah, blah. But his point, the VP's point, was like, if you had looked us up at all, like, this is definitely a company, and as a field with a lot of artistic expression, and I get that, but it's still a company. And he's like, if you're wearing slacks and a button up, okay, the sports coat not needed. He's like, it's still an interview, and that's what I'm looking for. And he's like, because that person's going to be, I'm going to have to stay on top of them if deadlines aren't met. I want someone who's taking it seriously. And I was like, well, that's fair. Whether he gave that person a shot or not, like, that was his point, is like, what I'm seeing right now is not instilling faith in me right off the bat.
Yeah, and those are easy decisions that you can make, and they don't take a ton of time. Most of the time, if you're applying for a position with a new company, like, you're mildly interested in what it is that you're going to be doing and what it is that they're going to be expecting of you. It takes like 20 minutes to go ahead and just get a baseline feel of the expectations of that particular, job. And then again, this goes back to me for confidence. And I've spoken about this in previous episodes, but I used to do this activity with people when I would interview them. If it was someone that I felt I could challenge or someone that I felt could learn a valuable lesson, I'd be like, let's switch sides of the table real quick. And I just want you to take a look at me, dressed in a suit, or just, shirt and tie, whatever it is, and listen to the way that I answer questions about this job and this position. When you're prepared, confidence kind of comes with that, and trust comes with that. If I'm interviewing someone and they know even a baseline level of what it is that we do here, it makes that conversation go by a little easier.
I think you in a roundabout way made me think of another one of my points. I think it's really important that you want to be listening to what the interviewer is asking, and really, what are they looking for? And, put yourselves in their shoes, flip that table a little bit. I'm not saying that, like, literally you have to, let's say, flip the script, let me interview you. But part of that, to be able to do that, you really have to be paying attention, because I know that, and I am guilty of this, that I have definitely walked into rooms where, like, I have my preparedness and I'm have stock answers to certain things. And that's not a bad thing, but again, it's preparedness, it's confidence, but it's also like, is that answer the best answer for what that question might have been? Like really read
How
the
that
room.
question was asked.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before on another episode, active listening and powerfully listening. You can always be picking up on cues throughout an entire interview process that can better guide you to an answer that just fits more appropriately to what they're asking and how they are asking it. So if you are genuinely engaged in that process and I've been here with this too, I'll know the questions that most interviews will have in some capacity, and I'll have my responses kind of pre-generated and ready to go. But if you can listen throughout the process and pay attention to how both the questions and your answers are being asked and then being received, it can really help you throughout that interview keep that conversation going and engaging positively. And that ultimately is what it's all about, is leaving an impression that makes you slightly more memorable or greatly more memorable than the other 500 interviewees that are going to sit in that very same chair.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one's ability to read the room, whether it's a one-on-one or if you're getting a panel interview, is just going to help you stand out so much better. I'm thinking of an interview, which I'll reference again in a different way shortly, but when Shane and I worked at the movie theater that shall not be named ever. If you say its name 3 times at midnight in the mirror, it will appear and overcharge you for popcorn. I was applying for a marketing position, and myself and other candidates throughout the country got to a certain round in the interview process, and they flew us to Knoxville and interview. So this was a marketing position, and it was myself, and memory was, I believe, 3 other candidates for several different same jobs, several different markets. And there was a really, really nice guy who just really, really was not reading the room right. And we had a one-on-one sessions, but we also had like group interview sessions. So me and the other 3 people were down, and then they would kind of rotate in some of the people to ask us questions about different things. And this one guy, when he was asked like, well, how would you do this? Or how would you market this or that? It was a very lovely answer. I know I'm being kind of vague, but it's kind of like, he's like, well, we could do this or we could do that. We could, why don't we try doing this? And why don't we try to do this? And immediately it was one of those things that I knew was a mistake, because the tone of everything else that we had been shown and we had been talking about, and these people, if you listen to the questions they were asking, they were not interested in someone who was going to come in and just try to shake everything up. They wanted someone who could come in and say, here's how we've been doing it. This is the plan. How can you operate in this plan? What is that? They did not want the maverick. Now, that's good or bad. I mean, that's a different story. You can say is that the shortcoming, that they're not open to that. But my point is, in that moment, it became so clear that as excited as this interviewee was, he really wasn't reading the room, and he wasn't really listening to what everything else was. And I know he did not get offered a position.
Yeah, again, it goes exactly back to the active listening versus passive listening, reading that room appropriately. And again, like taking, mental notes and mental cues throughout your process of that interview or interview weekend to better set yourself up for the later questions and to respond in a way that, again, is more conducive to success and going to be heard a little bit better by the interviewer or interviewers.
Which kind of goes to another point I want to bring up, which is my 5th and final point. Right now, we've talked so far about confidence and being genuine, and we've talked about being prepared. You really got to do your homework, both directions on that. And then, as we're saying, the active listening, and the last thing that I think really has always borne well for me, and even if it means I didn't get the job, is being honest with what you're looking for. Sometimes, in my experience, I've taken a step back in jobs because I feel like there's more growth potential. So if I'm in an interview and they say, well, what are you looking for? Maybe the salary here is less, they see my numbers or they see my title from before. And it might be the honest thing to say, at my current job or my previous job, there was a ceiling and I hit it, and there was just no place else to go. So what I'm looking for is someplace I can hang my hat for the next 2, 3, 5 years, whatever. And the same thing also applies at some point when you're talking about wages. I think it's fair. You got to do your homework. You can't go to a small company and say, I want $100,000 a year, but do your homework and be honest with what you need and what you're looking for.
That's the exact situation I found myself in 2 years ago when I did finally leave our theater job. Now, I had done fairly well for myself financially there to a point, but as you mentioned, wage-wise, there was a ceiling, and then opportunity-wise, not that there was a ceiling, but the expectations to break through that ceiling were things that I just was not willing to do at that point, and I had to be very honest with myself that the end of that road had come. And I knew, well, I didn't know originally. I should backtrace on that. I did not assume that the interview process and job search process once leaving would be so difficult, because some companies will look at your salary and your title and they'll say, I don't even want this person in the room. We can't compete with what they just left. But when you do get in the room and you do have the opportunity, honesty is going to be everything. It's partnership. No matter how you look at it, it's a partnership. You have to trust them. They have to trust you.
And it's like I say, that aspect of honesty. I had a part-time job for a bit working at a cigar shop. I may have mentioned that. And when I went on the interview for that job, which completely was I don't want to say it was a lark. It wasn't that I wasn't serious. It was more like, I don't know what a shop like this can offer me. So let me just go see what they want. I literally happened to be at a shop and they had a help wanted sign. I came back, dropped off an application and a resume, and they called me for an interview. And I went in and I sat and I had the interview, and still friends with the guy who interviewed me. Great guy. And we had a really good conversation. It was all these things we're talking about right now. But cards on table, when he said, well, this is kind of what we can offer and what we're looking for. And they were looking for a full-time position. It was so far away from what I could do that I told him. I was straight up front. I wasn't rude. And I said, unfortunately, I think we're just too far apart here. I said, and honestly, it's not out of disinterest. It's just one of those things that there is someone that this is going to work perfectly for them. Yeah, I just don't think I'm that person. And he said, well, let me ask you. He said, we're looking for full-time people, but what if we took that job and made it part-time? And I said, I so appreciate you even suggesting an idea like that. But honestly, I was like, there is someone, and I know this, that can fill this job in the full-time capacity you need at the wage you're talking about with the hours you're defining. And it's like a perfect job for them and probably for you. And I don't want to rob someone of that. I'm looking for a lateral move or a move forward in my life, and this just isn't that. And I think he really respected that. I think he really did, that I was being honest, he was being honest, because it was a few days later that he called me and he said, look, I want to see, I really heard you, where you're coming from, and let me ask you a question. I said, yeah. He's like, would you be interested in maybe like a little part-time thing and, pretty much weekends? Give me Saturdays and maybe a night or two during the week. And my response, I was like, I would love to do that. That's a great little part-time gig for me. And, this is something I'm interested in. I just want to reaffirm what we said the other day. Please let me know, I don't want to take this job from someone else. And I think that was another in the thing that clinched our relationship. And as I said, I'm still friends with this guy, that he said, no, he's like, you know what? I have someone else that I'm going to offer that position to. And it worked out completely because everyone was just being honest.
I'm sure a lot of you listeners right now are kind of listening to that saying, well, that never happens. And I think in some scale, everything in Josh's life never happens. He is the anomaly of all anomalies. However, I know it did happen. I'm saying it doesn't happen for it does not happen for people like me. But no, I think that what you could take from that is the fact that in my experience and in my knowing Josh, that is a conversation that I can close my eyes and immediately see him having and feeling confident for him and feeling confident for his then boss, because there is a way that you can approach those conversations that will lead to an opportunity that maybe neither you nor the interviewer or boss or owner or whatever knew was going to be there. If you can make an impression so deeply in the way that you connect and the way that you care, because Josh, you cared about not being enough for the need that this person had for their business, and also the potential applicant who could slide in and fill that role appropriately. And to be able to have that conversation and have it in the way that you did, like I said, a lot of the stories that you're going to hear, that you have heard from Josh throughout and that you're going to continue to hear, are things that maybe they're the anomaly to what we believe is normal, but we can all kind of take something from it. And I took something from that. And it got me a job in a restaurant by a very, very similar conversation. Josh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it doesn't always work, but and that's okay too. I mean, for every, not to beat that horse of every positive as a negative, but just to your point, no, I recall I was applying once for a talent agency, which was so different than what I really was wanting to be doing at the time. But this, I called in, and this woman was interviewing me. She was looking at my resume and going over all this stuff, and we were talking, and at some point she was like, I think I had my bag on me, carrying bag, and it has like some books in it, and she glanced at it and was like, what are you reading? Which is like a really off the beaten path interview question. And I pulled out my book, and I was like, oh, I'm reading the collected stories of Jorge Luis Borges. And she was like, why do you want to work here? And it was not in any way a negative thing. It was more like, this is not the job for you. And at that point, to your point, to this conversation, I was honest too. I was like, I need a job. I was like, that's what it is. I was like, I need a job, and I feel like I can do this job. And these are my interests and this and that. And we had a really, really nice rest of the afternoon, but nothing came of that one. It doesn't always work out, but it certainly wasn't wasting anyone's time. It would have been a waste of time for that person to call me back for a second or third interview if they really felt like, this isn't going to be the right fit after spending that much time going through the process. Or again, once they saw that, and then they clearly were honest to me, like, yeah, you're going to be the round peg in the square hole here, man. We're not reading literature here.
Yeah, it all speaks back to that honesty. Like being on the flip side of that, you was the interviewee, I was the interviewer of a gentleman who sat down across from me for a part-time job and was giving this interview like he wanted to be the president of the company. And I respected it so much because, looking at this gentleman's resume, I mean, he was great. It was everything that you would want if you were looking to seat someone in some sort of upper management. But the reality of it was he was coming for a part-time job. And I felt like this was so off base. I was like, this is like, I had to be honest with him. I was like, I will give you this job because I love you. And it was after I was honest about what it was that we were looking for and what kind of work he may be doing. He was like, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, just as you mentioned, I just need a part-time job. Like, this is our slower season. He owns his own company, and it's important to me to be able to have the additional funds in this off season just in case. And that's why I'm here today. And I'm like, perfect. We understand each other. And then I ended up working for him several years later because same thing. You sit there and you build these relationships and you don't know where they're going to take you.
We've talked about some success stories here. And, I want to tie it back to something they said in the beginning, which is even if you lose, sometimes you can win. And I mentioned that marketing job that I had gone for. I actually wound up getting that job. But the catch was that I had applied at this time. We were, I'm living in Philadelphia. The job I applied for was in New York. I have a brother who lived in New York, and I asked him, is that viable, commuting the whole 9 years? He said, yeah, it is. It can work. So the job they wound up offering me was the same position, but it was in Washington, D.C. And the reason I say it was a win, obviously I did, I did well enough that they wanted to offer me. And it begs the question, like, well, why didn't you get this other market? And was it experience or something like that? And at the end of the day, after everything was said and done, ultimately I did not take that position. But I found out, this goes to that thing, just sometimes you just can't beat the competition. that the person they wound up going for, who did apply for that, lived in New York. So it just made so much sense that since they wound up being a good, viable candidate, they brought this person into interview, and when they actually turned out to have the goods that they could do the job too, it was like, well, that person's already based there. So as I said, that's something where it's like, I would have never known that, and I couldn't have really fought that, but I still won. And, at the time, I was seeing a young lady whose stepmother was the head of HR for a very, very large company. And I remember, I was kind of depressed about that for a little bit after that job, because I felt like, man, I even after all that, I wound up not moving ahead. And she pointed out, she's like, but you got the job. And
Sure.
I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, you got the job. She said it would have been no different if they'd given you New York and wouldn't have been able to make the salary number you would have needed. The point is still that you got the job. And she's like, so you got to take that, now move forward. You got to find something else. She was absolutely right. I just had to reframe how I was viewing it. But the point was that all those steps we've talked about, the confidence, being honest, being prepared and genuine and listening, they all worked in that moment. I just didn't get the offer that I honestly felt comfortable taking. I wasn't going to move to Washington, D.C. at that point in my life.
How do you feel about that now, just out of curiosity?
It was that conversation that definitely helped. That really took the sting out. And then again, finding out that the guy who got it really lived there, that also helped. But I look back, and at that time, I do not doubt that I made the right decision. But there's always moments where you kind of replay and you say, well, I wonder if I could have made that work. And at the time I was seeing someone, and before I had turned the position down, she said well, what is this going to do for us? How are we going to make it? What do we do? And my statement to her was, give me a year, and I swear to you, if I take this job, I swear to you that in a year I will be back up here. Because she was also based in Philly at the time. And I was just like, we will figure this out. I will come home on the weekends, or you will come down, we can still see each other every, we'll figure it out. We'll just make that work, and I'll put a timeline to it.
That's also something super valuable. That's something, I don't know if we've talked about it on the show or not, and just as a side point to later potential conversation, but a gentleman sits there and says, if my decisions are impacting a loved one in some way, and you're going to ask something of them, that timeline that you're holding yourself accountable to, stick to that. That's a really good piece.
Well, I think if your decision in that arena, if your decision is going to affect a loved one or a relationship or whatnot, what I can say is a gentleman includes that person in the decision-making process.
Yes.
If this is a real and valuable relationship, a gentleman includes that person in the conversation, because honestly, to me, you can't walk into an interview being prepared, being genuine, and being honest unless you know what you're looking for, and that reflects your partner in that way.
Look, when I left the theater, that was a conversation that my partner and I, we talked about ad nauseum. I mean, it was months on end. And when we got to a place where I finally decided, okay, I need to walk away, she was a big part of that decision. And it was something that made that decision easier. And I was able to walk away a little bit more confidently. And then when I was able to get into the position that I'm in now with a different company, it was the same kind of thing. The expectations were going to be a little bit different than what my previous job would entail in terms of time, wage. There were going to be adjustments, and I needed to know that she was going to be okay with that. And I love that exactly what you said. I would have never been able to go into my initial interview with this company, which, by the way, began like a train wreck, and I'll get to it in a second. But I would not have been able to go in there if I didn't have those conversations leading in, and that my partner and I were on the exact same page here. But one thing I did want to just kind of touch on in terms of, a story that kind of relates to me and how it relates to those 5 points that we talked about beforehand, with is sometimes circumstances are just unavoidable. And it's hard in the moment to not get flustered by that. Josh, in your circumstance, a candidate lived in the city they posted for. In mine, 4 cars caught on fire on 95. I had to drive to Delaware for this interview, and I had driven the route the night before. Josh, you even offered your house to me the night before.
Yeah.
I recall this. And I was like, no, man, I drove it the night before. I'm good. I'll, not a problem at all. So I left in time that probably would have given me nearly an hour to just kind of walk around Delaware prior to my interview and just kind of ease my way into that morning. And then 4 cars caught on fire. That's an unavoidable thing. Now, I contacted that office as I was sitting in traffic on 95 in cold sweats now, taking off my jacket in the car, trying to calm myself down, thinking, God, they're going to tell me don't even bother coming in. They took a chance on me and they said, you know what, when you get here, we're going to make time for you. And I asked them that when I got there. It was one of the first questions I was able to ask my interviewer. And I had said, after the interview was nearing its end, I said, I have to ask, like, I've been on your side of the table. And if someone was as late to an interview as I am today, I don't know that I would have still taken that interview. Can I ask you why you let me still come? And he said, because you called me in a timely manner. We knew about it. Half of our staff come from the same direction. These things happen. And frankly, your resume was great. Your references were even better. And you were someone we wanted to take a shot on. And I'm glad that we did. And that next day I got offered the job. So much is in circumstances and timing. And I think what it all really boils down to is if you have kind of a system that makes you the most prepared to hit on all 5 of those things, I think you're going to find success.
100%. I think you said, we both have a lot of experience on the other side of the table. And what I can say is that all of those things we've listed and about what we try to bring in when we're interviewing, as the person who's been asking questions, as the person who winds up offering jobs to people sometimes, I am looking for those things. I will ask them, do you have any questions for me? And when someone says no, that's fair. But I'll be honest when someone says yes. And they do ask me questions about maybe even things we just talked about. I don't mean in a repetitious way. If they're saying, hey, you mentioned this, and I'm just curious, what about this other thing? That sticks for me because it's like, oh, they're really listening. It's all stuff that I can tell you on the others, having been on the other side of the table, that I look for. And as Shane mentioned, those people will wind up sticking in my head, usually in a good way.
Absolutely. And I do think it's a really good exercise to sit down, the night before, the week before, whatever it is, pretend to be on the other side of the table for a moment. What would impress you? And it is little things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be these crazy wow factor things.
Sometimes like wearing a wife beater t-shirt with a sports coat. That's the crazy thing that sticks out in here.
I got to think that wasn't the best decision that he made that day.
He might have thought this is how they'll remember me. He just didn't think the context with which we'll remember you.
And now he's going to live in infamy in a podcast.
So to wrap it up a bit, I would say that when people have asked, some insights or feedback on the experiences we've had in regards to interviewing in the professional world, and by the way, this is pre-pandemic, so yes. These are the things that worked before the pandemic, at least for us. I think it really does come back to those points, again, in no order, just being honest with what you're looking for, where you're at, what you need, being prepared for the job you're looking for, and doing your homework. What is that job or what does that new company need from you? What are they looking for? I think you want to be genuine when you're there. You being present in the room, being genuine with your answers, and being confident. You don't want to be cocky, but again, you know what you know. You know what I mean? And you want to feel confident with that. And ultimately, as we were talking about, really listening to where the interviewer is looking for. What are they asking? What can you ascertain about what they're trying to fill? And I think if you do that, I think that steers people pretty well. It's starting from a place of positivity.
Yeah, that's it. It is all about positivity. And I'm super glad that the listener who reached out did. Hopefully they took something from this. Hopefully you all can take something from this. Again, mentioning this is not a silver bullet foolproof plan here. These are just two guys talking about what has worked for us. So I'm going to throw this back over to Robert De Niro in an interview that hopefully you don't find yourself in. Maybe a little less awkward, maybe a little bit more confident.
It's going to be a couple of interviews today, Ben. We want to make sure that we both find the right fit. Business as usual is not really our motto, so we hope you have some fun here. This is the first time we're hiring senior interns, so some of our intern questions may not exactly fit your profile, but we're gonna go for it anyway, okay?
Fire away.
Okay, good. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Northwestern.
Hey, my brother went to Northwestern.
Probably not at the same time.
Probably not. He graduated in 2009.
Class of 65.
Oh, wow. What was your major? Do you remember?
And after Northwestern, you went on to...
I went to work for Dex One.
Okay, and they made...
Phone books. I was in charge of overseeing the printing of the physical phone book. I did that for over 20 years. And before that, I was a VP of sales and advertising.
So, do they still make phone books? I mean, doesn't everyone just Google numbers?
I believe they do, but before Google, that was how you got it.
Oh, no, yeah, I get it.
So 40 years at the phone book company, that is amazing. Seriously. Okay, Benjamin. Now, I'm gonna ask you one of our more telling questions for all of our interns, so I want you to, this is the one to really think about, okay? And take your time. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
When I'm 80.
Yeah.
This has been another episode of the Gentleman Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Shane and Josh. If you've enjoyed tonight's show, we will have additional shows on the 1st and 15th of every month. We also have written content on our blog at www.thegentlemanpodcast.blog. Please be sure to rate and review if you've enjoyed this content, and also share. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with your coworkers, share with strangers on the street. We are your gentlemen, and we thank you for listening.